Okay, so the reason that we cut our bias strips on the bias, which is the diagonal of the fabric, is so that it'll have a little bit of stretch. So if you try to stretch your fabric from side to side, warp on the warp or the weft of the fabric, there's not any stretch in it. But if you pull your fabric on the bias, on the diagonal, you'll see there's a lot of stretch in the fabric that way. So you fold your fabric from cut edge to selvage edge. So the cut edge, which is, you know, the edge where they cut it off the bolt at the fabric store, you fold that edge over to the selvage, creating a right angle, giving you a 45-degree angle to the warp. Then using your ruler and your rotary cutter, you just cut your 2-inch strips one after the other. Obviously, if you don't have a rotary cutter, you can just use your ruler and mark it off with chalk or a pencil and cut your strips with scissors. That works just fine as well. I do 2-inch strips for my bias tape. For quilting or for mask making for your straps on your mask. 2 inches works great. Okay, so then the next step, once the bias strips are all cut, the next step is to fasten. You see how stretchy that fabric is? When it's cut on the bias, it really has a nice bit of stretch in there. So the next step is to line up the fabric strips and sew them together to make one long strip of bias tape. So you're going to line up two ends right side to right side, creating a right angle with your bias strips, and make sure that you leave a little bit of that corner hanging off on each side. You're going to sew from corner to corner, that little crook there, you're going to sew corner to corner. So here we are at my sewing machine, and you see how my bias strips are lined up, and it creates a right angle with your bias strips. And again, make sure you sew them from that little corner that's created so that you have about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch seam allowance there. So sew corner to corner. Since this is going to be used to make mask straps, I am going to go ahead and backstitch at the beginning of the end. But when you're making bias tape or connecting this for making welt, you don't have to backstitch at the beginning and the end. But I'm going to do that on here so that it'll stay together for my mask straps. So just continue to line up each of your straps end to end, creating a right angle. Spin it around a bit and sew again corner to corner until all of your bias strips are sewn together and you have one long bias strip. And then the next step is to take it to your ironing board or your ironing table, and I'll show you the tool that is really the secret to making bias tape really fast. Okay, so once all the bias strips are all sewn together, you're going to take your one long bias strip to your sewing table or your ironing table and press all those seams open, every single one of them. So it'll pull through the bias maker nice and easily and not be bulky. So I'll meet you at my sewing table. There's all the bias strip all sewn together, so you've got enough to do probably 2 masks there. Okay, so here we are at my pressing table, and this is the secret ingredient to making bias tape really fast, is this bias tape maker. It has instructions on the back, so It's very simple. So you just bring your bias tape to your pressing table and you insert your first or the beginning of your one long strip into the back of the bias tape maker, and you do that with the wrong side up. And it does have the instructions on the back of the box in case you forget. So push it through wrong side up and get your iron, heat up your iron nice and hot, and pull that strip through that bias tape maker and press it as it's coming out the other side. The bias tape maker has this nice little handle on it, so you can grab a hold of that handle and just pull that little bias tape maker back and press as you go. It's super simple and it makes perfect little bias tape. It's a lot of fun. When you get to a seam, it's a little bit harder to pull it through, but you just wiggle it a little bit and it'll get that seam through there. You might have to manipulate it a little bit to fold it back down, but you'll get it. So then the last step is to take your bias tape and you're going to fold it in half with the two finished edges meeting up so that you have a nice strip of folded in half bias tape. And then the very last thing is just to sew it onto your project. So that's how easy it is. Bias tape is really easy to make, and now you've got enough to do a few masks. And if you do it in bulk style or assembly line style, you can have enough bias tape made to do many masks or whatever you're using your bias tape for, quilts or lining your projects. There you have it. It's that easy. Thanks for watching, you guys. See you next time. Check my other video on how to make a mask. Thanks for watching, you guys. Mimsy at mimsyandcompany.com.